We're fortunate again to have Dr. David Adler, who's not only a medical practitioner, he's the president of the Australian Jewish Association. Welcome, David, and thank you for making time for us.
Thank you so much, Professor David Flint, and always very, very good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Adler, I've always seen over the years the extraordinary philanthropy of the Jewish community into the general community of Australia in the arts, in medicine, and all sorts of very worthy causes. Is this something special? Is this something which is part of Jewish teaching?
It's interesting you raise the question in that way, because the answer is a clear yes. There is actually a rule in Judaism that you should provide something called tzedakah. It's a Hebrew word which roughly translated means charity. And the rule is to give 10% of your net income. And if you are fortunate enough to have an above average income, the actual Jewish teaching is the purpose of being in that advantageous position is in order that you should do additional good. And it has been a Jewish tradition, regardless, to be very generous in supporting worthwhile causes. You see very often sections of hospitals or universities or, as you say, the arts and culture sponsored by Jewish people in Australia and elsewhere. Yeah, it's a very firm part of the Jewish tradition.
And this has biblical support, does it?
Yes, it does. That's where the rule comes from. Tzedakah. The biblical writings actually specify that in agricultural times there are certain rules about leaving part of the crop, not picking up product that has been dropped, so that those that are poor and disadvantaged can access that form of agricultural product at no cost. So yes, back to biblical times, there is that tradition.
I find it extraordinary, as you no doubt do too, that in some of the cultural organisations, people are being anti-Semitic within those organisations. For example, the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, where you have these people coming in, they're performing, they're taking part, and they bring politics and a very nasty form of politics into those organisations. And obviously, this is going to drive some of the philanthropists away from the organisations.
100%. And it shocked us. I mean, if you're someone who appreciates classical music and you want to give financial support to classical music, you're not doing so in order to create an environment where radical politics is preached. And we have seen, as I'm sure you're aware because it's been in the media quite prominently, that some of the better known and wealthier Jewish families are reviewing the giving programs that they've had in place for many years.
Interestingly, when I was at high school, which was Sydney High, one of our teachers was Dr. Basser, and he came from a family of very well-known philanthropists at the time, and I think they were very generous in their philanthropy, which we became aware of as students.
The Basser family is well known.
Yes. Another thing that I wanted to ask you about is what's becoming more and more described as votes for visas, and we have a graph here from Gideon Rosner, which shows that of the countries giving visas to people claiming to be refugees fleeing from Gaza, we seem to be the country which is the most generous, and some would say the most careless, and really careless in the giving of those visas. The other Western countries are giving very few, and extraordinarily, the Arab and Muslim countries seem to be almost unanimous in closing their borders to whatever is happening in Gaza. This seems to be a really extraordinary thing for the Albanese government to be involved in, because there is always the danger that if you don't check the backgrounds of people, that you're going to be bringing in people who will revive and fight their ancient hatreds, but perhaps do worse and even resort to terrorism, as we have seen in the past. What is your feeling about these visas being issued, tourist visas even?
David, this is a scandal, and there's quite a lot to unpack here. But briefly. This is not just high risk, this is extreme risk. You could not find a place on the planet which involves more risk from which to import people. Unfortunately, there have been 2 generations in Gaza that have been brainwashed with hatred, not just hatred of Jews, anti-Semitism, but also hatred of infidels, hatred of Western society. There have been a number of surveys which have demonstrated that Hamas still retains around 70% support, and the sort of actions that were carried out on October the 7th of the most barbaric murder, sexual violence, kidnapping, has overwhelming support. So it's really highly problematic. And the immediate surrounding countries, being Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, have taken between them exactly 0 because they assess the risk as too great. And it is extraordinary and incomprehensible that our government can argue that they've done security screening, sometimes in 24 hours or less, sometimes as quickly as in 1 hour from Canberra, that, maybe our bureaucrats have greater insight and are able to assess more accurately than all the surrounding Arab Muslim countries. It's a complete nonsense. And past experience, unfortunately, where cohorts from this area have been brought in, have a very, very poor track record. There was a group of about 320 that were brought into Denmark some years ago, and there was a follow-up study done, and about 2/3 of them, by the time the follow-up study was done, had a criminal record. It's a big deal. It is very, very hard to integrate these people, and we have a lot of information that the security screening was not done and could not have been done properly, and it puts all Australians at risk. And as you know, it's said that the highest duty of a government is to protect its citizens, and on this duty, our government is failing. And we think that people like Peter Dutton and Senator James Paterson have been absolutely correct in calling for a halt, at least until individual proper assessments can be done.
What do you understand, Dr. Adler, what do you understand by the statement of the head of ASIO that mere rhetorical support of is acceptable? What on earth is rhetorical support of terrorists?
Look, I've never heard that term before, and as you might be aware, in the last few days he sort of walked it back a bit, arguing that he might have been misinterpreted, or I think he just spoke very, very badly. He's now saying that if anyone indicates that they have any measure of support for Hamas, which is a proscribed terrorist organisation, that would put up a red flag from ASIO's point of view. So I think he's shifted his words to having got himself into some difficulty in that particular interview on the ABC. So there is no difference between rhetorical support and ideological support. And as has been seen all around the world, in the UK, in Europe, and elsewhere, people who have rhetorical or ideological support can be a very major problem in a Western society, and some of them can be quite violent, acting it out.
Yes, but if this is being done as is being suggested, because of a fear of losing Muslim votes in some electorates, then this is an appalling thing to risk Australia with. There's another thing going on, and that is with the shocking murder of the 6 hostages, which is really, really appalling. Obviously, people in Israel are upset by that, but are they making unreasonable demands, do you think, on the Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, in insisting that he establish a ceasefire with the terrorists who don't seem to be interested in anything like that?
This is a dreadful, dreadful problem, and I think all reasonable people would be shocked that innocent hostages were executed. The information we have is that the IDF was closing in towards the tunnel in which they were held, and Hamas shot them at close range in the head and left them there so that the bodies could be discovered. I've learnt in the last 24 hours that one of the women at her autopsy was found to weigh only 79 pounds. That's between 35 and 36 kilograms. So you can only imagine what sort of suffering they have endured in the last 11 months, and to end like this. You don't negotiate with terrorists. I can fully understand that there are people who are distressed, who would like any deal done that frees the hostages. But what Hamas is demanding in return is the release of thousands of convicted terrorists. And these deals have been done before. And unfortunately, it's an impossible situation where, in order to save a few people, you release murderers, and down the track, even more people are killed. And many of those who were involved in the leadership of the October 7 massacre were previously released terrorists, including Sinwar, the current leader of Hamas. He was released to free a previous hostage by the name of Gilad Shalit. So I wouldn't like to be in Netanyahu's shoes. It's possibly the most difficult political leadership job in the world at the moment, and I certainly don't have the authority or the wisdom to offer him advice.
Yes, I was appalled by the President of the United States, who's been on a holiday for some considerable period of time, when he was asked, is Prime Minister Netanyahu doing enough? And he just turned to the camera and said no, and then walked off, which I thought was absolutely appalling for an ally to say this. And it is such a careless thing and such an unjustified thing. And the other thing that I found so awful was the fact that the terrorists told all of these people to record their farewells.
That's right.
and then shot
That's
them.
right. Yeah.
I mean, this is a
Correct.
terrible thing to do to people who were very close to being relieved by the Israeli soldiers. Terrible, absolutely awful.
To come full circle, this is the ideology that we risk importing into Australia. We have not screened out those who might support what Hamas has done and what they are currently doing. And look, the role of our government, number one, is to look after Australia, although they've been involved in throwing advice and criticisms at Israel quite a lot since October 7, as you say, as the President of the United States. But what they never do in their responses is suggest a better way of doing it. How do you deal with a terrorist organisation like Hamas in a better way than Israel? And if you look at the times that Western countries have come up against radical extremist ideologies, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's ISIS, whether it's the Nazis, the Allies have been fairly ruthless in their response in dealing with organisations like that, even more so than Israel, with less regard to civilian life than Israel has shown. So it's very easy to be critical, as Biden has done. It's much more difficult to come up with solutions. And if you look at the solutions that countries like the United States has applied in the past, they've done it with a lot more force than Israel has brought to bear.
Yes, you need only think of the massive bombing of Germany and then the atom bombing of Japan to find proof of a willingness to go to full lengths in relation to getting the surrender that they needed in those cases. Dr. Adler, once again, thank you very much for coming along and making time for this and giving us some very useful information and comments on the things that are really concerning the Australian nation and indeed the world. Thank you again.
Thank you, Professor Flint.